Grace Okonkwo was the kind of woman who turned heads wherever she went. Her skin glowed like polished mahogany, and her smile could light up the darkest room. When she walked through the gates of Bright Future Academy each morning, parents would pause to greet her, and children would wave excitedly from their classrooms. "Good morning, Miss Grace." They would chorus, and she would wave back with that radiant smile that made everyone believe she was the kindest teacher in the whole school. But behind that beautiful smile hid a terrible secret. Grace taught Nursery 3 Yellow, a class of 20 energetic children between the ages of 4 and 5. These little ones trusted her completely. They believed every word she said, obeyed every instruction she gave, and never questioned her authority. To them, Miss Grace was second only to their parents, a figure of absolute trust and care. It was this trust that Grace had learned to exploit. The trouble had started 6 months ago, on a day that seemed ordinary in every way. Grace had forgotten to prepare her lunch that morning. She had rushed out of her small apartment in the teacher's quarters, running late after staying up too long watching her favorite television series the night before. By noon, her stomach was growling so loudly that the children giggled during their reading time. "Miss Grace, your belly is talking," Little Kofi had said, and the whole class had burst into laughter. Grace had laughed too, but inside, she felt embarrassed and frustrated. She looked at the shelf where the children's lunch boxes sat in neat rows, each one labeled with a child's name. The aroma of home-cooked meals filled the classroom, making her mouth water and her stomach cramp with hunger. That was when she noticed Nia's lunch box. Nia was a quiet girl whose mother worked as a cook at the Grand Plaza Hotel. Every day, Nia brought the most delicious-smelling meals to school. Today, Grace could smell jollof rice with fried plantains and chicken. "Just one spoonful," Grace had told herself. "Just to tide me over until I get home." She had called Nia to her desk with a smile. "My dear, let me check your food for you. Sometimes flies land on food when we're not watching, and I need to make sure everything is clean and safe." Nia had handed over her lunch box without question. Grace had opened it, and the steam that rose from the perfectly cooked rice made her dizzy with desire. She took a spoonful, then another, then another. Before she knew it, she had eaten half of Nia's lunch. The taste was incredible. Better than anything Grace had cooked for herself in months. The chicken was perfectly seasoned, the rice fluffy and rich with tomatoes and spices, the plantains sweet and crispy. When Nia came to collect her lunch box later, Grace had smiled and said, "I found some bad parts in your food, so I removed them for you. The rest is safe to eat now." Nia had looked at her half-empty lunchbox with confusion, but she didn't question her teacher. She was only 4 years old. What did she know about how much food her mother had packed? That evening, Grace had felt a twinge of guilt, but it was quickly drowned out by the memory of how delicious that meal had been. The next day, when she saw the children's lunch boxes again, the guilt was gone completely. In its place was something darker, desire mixed with opportunity. This time, she called 3 children to her desk. She took food from each of them, eating quickly while the children played outside during their break time. She locked the classroom door and closed the curtains, telling herself it was just to keep flies out. By the end of the week, Grace had developed a system. Every lunch period, she would lock the door and systematically go through each child's lunchbox. She would eat the best portions and return what remained to the children, always with the same excuse about removing germs or bad parts or checking for safety. The children, innocent and trusting, believed her every time. Zara Adamu was a shy girl, with large brown eyes and 2 neat braids that her mother plaited fresh every Sunday. She was small for her age and painfully timid, the kind of child who would rather go hungry than speak up for herself. Her mother, Mrs. Adamu, was a widow who worked as a seamstress from their small home. Despite their modest circumstances, Mrs. Adamu always made sure Zara had nutritious, delicious meals. She would wake up at 5 in the morning to prepare Zara's lunch, packing it with love and care into a bright yellow lunchbox that Zara carried to school every day. Mrs. Adamu specialized in making pepper soup with goat meat, a dish that was Zara's absolute favorite. The rich, Spicy broth with tender chunks of meat was something Zara looked forward to all morning, but for the past 3 weeks, Zara had been coming home with her lunchbox nearly empty, yet she was always hungry. At first, Mrs. Adamu thought perhaps Zara was eating at school and then getting hungry again later because she was growing. But then she noticed that Zara seemed tired and listless. The girl who used to play energetically in their small yard now came home and immediately lay down. "Zara, did you enjoy your lunch today?" Mrs. Adamu asked one evening as she combed her daughter's hair. Zara hesitated, her small fingers twisting in her lap. "Yes, Mama." "All of it?" Another pause. "Miss Grace said there were germs in some parts, so she had to eat them to protect me." Mrs. Adamu's hands stilled in Zara's hair. "She ate your food?" "Only the parts with germs, Mama. She's very kind. She doesn't want us to get sick." That night, Mrs. Adamu lay awake thinking about what Zara had said. Something about it didn't sit right with her. She was a careful cook. She boiled her water, washed her vegetables thoroughly, and always covered Zara's food until it was packed. How could there be germs? The next morning, she prepared Zara's lunch as usual, but this time she did something different. She counted exactly how many pieces of meat she put in the pepper soup, 12 pieces. She made a mental note. When Zara came home that afternoon, Mrs. Adamu opened the lunchbox immediately. There were only 4 pieces of meat left. "Zara, how many pieces of meat did you eat?" Zara looked confused. "I don't know, Mama. Miss Grace checked my food first. She said 8 pieces had germs, so she ate them." 8 pieces. Out of 12. That meant Grace had eaten 2/3 of Zara's meal. Mrs. Adamu felt anger rising in her chest, but she kept her voice calm. "And this happens every day?" Zara nodded, her eyes wide and innocent. But Mrs. Adamu was no fool. She had raised 4 children before Zara, back when her husband was still alive. She knew the difference between a teacher who cared and a teacher who was taking advantage. Still, she needed to be certain before she made any accusations. The next day, she prepared a meal that Zara didn't like, plain white rice with beans and no meat, no seasoning, nothing appealing at all. She packed it in Zara's lunchbox and sent her to school. "Mama, why didn't you cook pepper soup today?" Zara had asked, her face falling. "Just try this today, my dear. Tell me if you like it." That afternoon, when Zara came home, the lunchbox was completely empty. "Did you eat all of it?" Mrs. Adamu asked. Zara's face told her everything before the girl even spoke. Miss Grace said it was very good and healthy. She ate most of it to check for germs. A woman who claimed to be checking for germs would not eat plain, unseasoned rice and beans with enthusiasm. She would barely touch it. But Grace had devoured it, which meant she was simply hungry and eating whatever she could get her hands on. Now Mrs. Adamu was certain. Her daughter's teacher was stealing food from children. Mrs. Adamu was not a confrontational woman by nature. Years of widowhood and struggling to make ends meet had taught her to be careful, to think before she acted, to gather evidence before making accusations. She knew that Grace was popular at the school, that parents and staff alike admired her. If Mrs. Adamu accused her without proof, she might be dismissed as a troublemaker or worse, her daughter might face retaliation. So she began to investigate quietly. She started talking to other mothers during drop-off and pick-up times, asking casual questions about their children's eating habits. "Does your son finish his lunch at school?" She asked Mrs. Chen, whose son Kofi was in the same class as Zara. "Oh, he says he does. But he's always so hungry when he comes home. I think he's going through a growth spurt." "What about your daughter?" she asked Mrs. Bello, whose daughter Jade was known for being a picky eater. "It's strange, actually. Jade hates vegetables, but lately her lunchbox comes back empty. Her teacher says she's finally learning to eat properly." I was so happy. Mrs. Adamu felt her suspicions growing stronger. She spoke to 5 more mothers over the next week, and the pattern was clear. Children were coming home hungry. Lunch boxes were returning empty, or nearly empty. And all the mothers had been told that their children were either eating well or that the teacher was helping remove bad parts of the food. But Mrs. Adamu needed more than parent testimonies. She needed direct proof. One morning, she told Zara that she wasn't feeling well and asked if she could stay at school for a few hours to rest in the sick bay. The school receptionist, knowing Mrs. Adamu as a quiet, respectful parent, agreed without question. Mrs. Adamu positioned herself in a corridor near Nursery 3 Yellow, hiding behind a pillar where she could see through the small window in the classroom door. She waited through the morning lessons, watching Grace teach with animated gestures and that beautiful smile. She watched the children sing their alphabet song and practice writing their names. Then came lunchtime. Mrs. Adamu watched as Grace collected all the lunch boxes from the children and arranged them on her desk. She watched as Grace told the children to go wash their hands and take their time. Then, once all the children had left the classroom, Grace did something that made Mrs. Adamu's blood run cold. She locked the door from the inside. Through the window, Mrs. Adamu watched as Grace sat down and began opening lunch boxes one by one. She watched as Grace stuffed food into her mouth with barely concealed greed, eating quickly, her eyes half closed in satisfaction. She ate from Naya's box, then from Kofi's, then from Jade's. She ate and ate and ate. When the children knocked on the door to come back in, Grace quickly wiped her mouth, rearranged the lunch boxes, and unlocked the door with that radiant smile back in place. "Come in, my darlings. Your food is all checked and ready." Mrs. Adamu had seen enough. Her hands were shaking with rage as she walked to the headmistress's office. Mrs. Okoro, the headmistress of Bright Future Academy, was a stern woman in her late 50s with silver-streaked hair and glasses that she wore on a chain around her neck. She had been running the school for 20 years and prided herself on maintaining high standards. When Mrs. Adamu knocked on her door that afternoon, Mrs. Okoro was reviewing enrollment papers for the next term. "Come in," she called, not looking up from her desk. Mrs. Adamu entered quietly and stood in front of the desk, her hands clasped together nervously. Mrs. Okoro looked up and smiled in recognition. "Ah, Mrs. Adamu. Zara's mother. How can I help you today?" "Good afternoon, Ma." Mrs. Adamu's voice was respectful but firm. "I need to report something very serious about my daughter's teacher." Mrs. Okoro's smile faded slightly. She put down her pen and gestured to the chair across from her. "Please, sit. Tell me what's troubling you." Mrs. Adamu sat and took a deep breath. "Ma, Miss Grace has been stealing food from the children in her class. She locks the classroom door during lunchtime and eats their meals, then gives them back only the small portions that remain." Mrs. Okoro's expression shifted from concern to skepticism. "That's a very serious accusation, Mrs. Adamu. Miss Grace has been with us for 5 years. She's one of our most beloved teachers. Are you absolutely certain about this?" "I saw it with my own eyes today, Ma. I watched through the classroom window." She locked the door and ate from multiple children's lunch boxes. Mrs. Okoro leaned back in her chair, her face troubled. "This is very disturbing if true. But you must understand, Miss Grace is highly respected here. Parents praise her constantly. The children adore her. In all my years, I've never received a single complaint about her conduct. That's because the children don't know any better, Ma. She tells them she's checking for germs and eating the bad parts. They're only 4 and 5 years old. They believe everything she says." Mrs. Okoro was silent for a moment, tapping her fingers on the desk. "Have other parents complained about this?" "Not directly to you, Ma, but I've spoken to several mothers. Their children are coming home hungry. Their lunch boxes are mysteriously empty. But they didn't realize what was happening because Miss Grace is so charming and the children trust her completely. If what you're saying is true, Mrs. Adamu, this is not just theft. This is a betrayal of trust and abuse of authority. But I cannot simply accuse a teacher based on one parent's claim, even if that parent says she witnessed it. I need to handle this carefully." Mrs. Adamu leaned forward. "Ma, test her. Tomorrow, tell the parents to pack extra food or mark their portions. Better yet, install a camera in the classroom. You'll see I'm telling the truth. Mrs. Okoro considered this carefully. Finally, she nodded. I will look into this matter thoroughly. But Mrs. Adamu, I must ask you not to spread this accusation to other parents yet. If you're wrong, it could destroy an innocent woman's reputation. If you're right, I want to handle it properly through official channels. I understand, Ma. I'll speak with Miss Grace today. I won't mention your name or that anyone witnessed anything. I'll simply bring up the concern and observe her reaction. If she's innocent, she'll have nothing to hide. If she's guilty, I'll know. Mrs. Adamu left the office feeling both relieved and anxious. She had done what she needed to do. Now it was up to the headmistress to uncover the truth. That afternoon, as school was ending and the last children were being picked up by their parents, Grace was wiping down her chalkboard when there was a knock on her classroom door. Come in, she called cheerfully. Mrs. Okoro entered, her face neutral and unreadable. Good afternoon, Miss Grace. Do you have a moment? Grace's smile brightened. Always happy to see you. Is everything all right? Let's talk in my office, please. Something in Mrs. Okoro's tone made Grace's smile falter slightly, but she followed the headmistress down the corridor and into the office. Mrs. Okoro closed the door and gestured for Grace to sit. Miss Grace, I received some concerning information today, and I need to ask you about it directly. Grace's heart began to pound, but she kept her face composed. About lunchtime in your classroom. Specifically, about how you handle the children's meals. Grace felt her palms begin to sweat. I'm not sure I understand, Ma. Mrs. Okoro watched her carefully. Some parents have expressed concern that their children are coming home hungry, despite having been sent to school with full meals. They claim you tell the children you're checking their food for germs, and that you eat portions of their lunch. Grace's mind raced. She arranged her face into an expression of shock and hurt. Ma, that's absolutely ridiculous. Who would say such a thing about me? I'm not at liberty to say. But the accusation has been made, and I need to hear your side of things. Ma, you know me. Grace's voice took on a pleading quality. I've been teaching here for 5 years. I love these children like they're my own. Yes, I help them open their lunch boxes sometimes, especially the younger ones who struggle with the lids. And yes, I do check their food, but only to make sure it's safe to eat. You know how some parents can be careless about food hygiene. So you do handle their food? Only to help them, Ma. Sometimes I see ants or flies on their food, and I remove those parts. Sometimes, the food is too hot, and I blow on it to cool it down. But I would never steal from children. The very idea is insulting. Grace's performance was convincing. Her eyes even welled up with tears. Ma, I work so hard to be a good teacher. I stay late to prepare lessons. I buy supplies with my own money when the school budget runs out. And now someone is spreading lies about me? It breaks my heart. Mrs. Okoro's expression softened slightly. This was the Grace she knew, dedicated, caring, passionate about teaching. But Mrs. Adamu had seemed so certain, and she had claimed to witness it herself. Miss Grace, I want to believe you. Your record here has been exemplary. But I need to be thorough in investigating this matter. Would you have any objection to me observing your classroom during lunchtime tomorrow? Grace's stomach dropped, but she forced herself to smile. Of course not, Ma. You're welcome anytime. I have nothing to hide. Good. Then I'll stop by tomorrow around noon. In the meantime, I trust you'll continue to maintain the high standards we expect from our teachers. Always, Ma. Always. Grace left the office with her heart pounding. She had bought herself one day to figure out what to do. As she walked back to her classroom to collect her belongings, her mind was racing with plans and fears. Someone had reported her. But who? Which parent had figured it out? More importantly, how was she going to keep up the pretense when the headmistress was watching? The next morning, Grace arrived at school with a plan. She would eat a big breakfast, so she wouldn't be tempted by the children's food. She would make a show of carefully checking each lunchbox without eating anything, at least while Mrs. Okoro was watching. Once the headmistress saw that the accusations were false, things would go back to normal. But fate had other plans. That morning, as Grace was taking attendance, the classroom door opened and Mrs. Okoro entered with a small girl Grace had never seen before. "Good morning, class," Mrs. Okoro announced. "We have a new friend joining us today. This is Rita. She just moved here from the city, and I know you'll all make her feel welcome." Rita was a petite girl with bright eyes and a confident smile. She wore a crisp school uniform and carried a brand new backpack. Unlike most new students who were shy and nervous, Rita looked around the classroom with curiosity and interest. "Rita, you can sit here in the front," Grace said, pointing to an empty desk. Rita sat down and immediately began unpacking her supplies with a level of organization that was unusual for a 5-year-old. When she pulled out her lunchbox, Grace's eyes widened. It was a large, insulated container, the expensive kind that kept food hot for hours. As the morning progressed, Grace found herself distracted by thoughts of what might be in Rita's lunchbox. The girl was clearly from a wealthy family. Her shoes were new, her backpack was designer, and everything about her screamed privilege. Wealthy families usually had cooks who prepared elaborate meals. When lunchtime arrived, Mrs. Okoro appeared at the classroom door, just as she had promised. "Don't mind me, Miss Grace," the headmistress said, standing in the back of the room. "Just observing as part of our routine quality checks." Grace's hands trembled slightly as she collected the lunchboxes. With Mrs. Okoro watching, she made a show of carefully checking each one, looking for insects or spoiled food, but not eating anything. The children looked confused. This was different from the usual routine, but they said nothing. When Grace reached Rita's lunchbox, the new girl spoke up in a clear, confident voice. "My mother said I should not let anyone touch my food." The classroom went silent. All the children turned to look at Rita with wide eyes. No one had ever questioned Miss Grace before. Grace felt her face flush, but she kept her smile in place. "Sweetheart, I'm just checking to make sure everything is safe. It's what I do for all the children. My mother packed my food this morning. It's safe. She told me that no one should eat my food except me." Mrs. Okoro's eyes narrowed with interest as she watched this exchange. Grace's smile became strained. "I'm not going to eat your food, dear. I'm just checking it." "Then you can check without opening it," Rita said simply, holding her lunchbox protectively against her chest. The other children were watching this interaction with fascination. They had never seen anyone stand up to Miss Grace before. Zara, sitting in the back row, felt something stir inside her, a feeling she couldn't quite name. Grace felt trapped. With Mrs. Okoro watching, she couldn't force the issue. She couldn't threaten Rita or make her feel scared like she did with the other children. Not with the headmistress right there. "That's fine, Rita," Grace said through clenched teeth. "You can eat your food as is." But inside, Grace was seething. This new girl was going to be a problem. Over the next 2 weeks, Mrs. Okoro made several unannounced visits to Nursery 3 Yellow during lunchtime. Each time, Grace was on her best behavior, carefully checking food without eating any of it. The children went home with full stomachs for the first time in months. Mrs. Okoro began to doubt Mrs. Adamu's accusation. Perhaps the woman had been mistaken about what she saw. Perhaps Grace really had been doing nothing wrong all along. But then Mrs. Okoro stopped her surprise visits, and Grace's old habits returned immediately. However, things had changed in the classroom. Rita's defiance had planted a seed in the other children's minds. If Rita could refuse to hand over her lunch, why couldn't they? But Grace was clever. She began targeting the most vulnerable children first, the ones who were too shy or too scared to speak up. Zara became her primary victim again. One afternoon, Zara brought her favorite meal, her mother's special fried rice with shrimp. Mrs. Adamu had made it extra delicious, knowing how much Zara loved it. She had even added extra shrimp as a treat. When Grace opened Zara's lunchbox and smelled the fragrant rice, her mouth watered instantly. She had skipped breakfast that morning and was ravenous. Without hesitation, she locked the classroom door and began eating. The children watched in uncomfortable silence. Rita, sitting in the front row, spoke up. "That's not fair. That's Zara's food." Grace looked at Rita with cold eyes. "Mind your business, Rita. This doesn't concern you." "But my mother said." "I don't care what your mother said." Grace snapped, her beautiful mask slipping for just a moment. "In this classroom, I am in charge, not your mother. Now be quiet." Rita fell silent, but her jaw was set with determination. Grace ate more than half of Zara's fried rice, savoring every bite. When she finally returned the lunch box to Zara, there was barely a quarter of the meal left. Zara took her lunch box with trembling hands. She looked down at the meager portion and felt tears prick her eyes. She was so hungry, and she had been looking forward to this meal all morning. But Miss Grace had eaten most of it, just like always. For the first time, a thought occurred to Zara: this isn't fair. That evening, when Mrs. Adamu saw Zara's nearly empty lunchbox and her daughter's sad face, she felt rage boil up inside her. Mrs. Okoro's investigation had clearly been for show only. Nothing had changed, but Mrs. Adamu was a patient woman. If the headmistress wouldn't help, she would find another way. She began packing Zara's lunch with a special ingredient, something that would reveal the truth once and for all. But it would take careful planning and perfect timing. Meanwhile, Rita went home and told her mother everything that had happened. Rita's mother, Mrs. Williams, was a successful lawyer who didn't tolerate injustice in any form. She listened carefully to her daughter's story, her expression growing more serious with each word. "This teacher is eating the children's food?" Mrs. Williams asked, her voice sharp with disbelief. "Yes, Mama. She eats from everyone's lunchbox except mine, because I don't let her touch it. But she's mean about it. Today she ate almost all of Zara's food, and Zara was crying." Mrs. Williams made a decision right then. Tomorrow, she would pack Rita's lunch in a special way. And she would make sure that if Miss Grace tried to steal food again, there would be consequences. Rita's mother had a secret: her daughter had a rare heart condition that required daily medication. The medication had to be taken at specific times with food, and it had to be mixed into Rita's meals to ensure she took the full dose. The medication itself was harmless to Rita but could be dangerous to anyone else. It was a powerful drug designed specifically for her condition. If someone without that condition took it, especially in repeated doses, it could cause serious health problems: irregular heartbeat, kidney stress, dizziness, nausea, and in extreme cases, organ damage. Mrs. Williams always mixed the medication into Rita's food at home, carefully measuring each dose. It was tasteless and odorless, blended seamlessly into whatever meal she prepared. Rita had been taking this medication for 3 years, ever since she was diagnosed. It was as much a part of her routine as brushing her teeth. Mrs. Williams had always warned Rita never to share her food with anyone, not because she was selfish, but because the medication made it unsafe for others to consume. She had explained this to the teachers at Rita's previous school, and they had been understanding and careful, but she hadn't yet had the chance to explain it to anyone at Bright Future Academy. Rita had only been there for 2 weeks, and Mrs. Williams had been meaning to schedule a meeting with the headmistress to discuss her daughter's medical needs. She had filled out all the paperwork, but the actual face-to-face conversation hadn't happened yet. Now, after hearing what Rita told her about Miss Grace, Mrs. Williams made a calculated decision. She would pack Rita's lunch, as usual, with the medication mixed in as always. But she would also pack extra snacks in Rita's bag, enough to keep her fed even if Miss Grace took her main meal. Mrs. Williams wasn't trying to poison anyone. She was simply continuing her daughter's normal medical routine. But she suspected that if Miss Grace was truly eating children's food, she would eventually target Rita's lunch. And when she did, the consequences would reveal the truth in a way that couldn't be ignored or dismissed. The next morning, Mrs. Williams packed a beautiful lunch for Rita: jollof rice with chicken, Rita's favorite. Mixed into the rice, invisible and tasteless, was Rita's daily dose of medication. She also packed crackers, fruit, and juice boxes in Rita's backpack. "Remember, my darling," Mrs. Williams said as she walked Rita to class, "don't share your food with anyone. If you're still hungry after lunch, eat the snacks from your bag." "Yes, Mama," Rita said obediently. That morning, Grace arrived at school, feeling irritable. She had argued with her landlord about late rent, and she hadn't eaten breakfast because there was no food in her apartment. Her stomach was growling angrily by the time the morning lessons began. When lunchtime came, Grace's hunger had reached a desperate level. She collected the lunch boxes as usual, but today she was less cautious. Mrs. Okoro hadn't visited in over a week. The coast was clear. Grace locked the door and began eating. She devoured food from Kofi's lunchbox, then from Jade's, then from Naya's. But it wasn't enough. Her hunger was a gnawing beast inside her, demanding more. Then her eyes fell on Rita's lunchbox. The expensive insulated container sat there, surely filled with something delicious. Rita always tried to protect her lunch, but today the girl was outside using the bathroom. The lunchbox was unguarded. Grace opened it and the aroma of perfectly seasoned jollof rice made her dizzy with desire. Without hesitation, she began eating. The rice was delicious, the chicken tender and flavorful. She ate quickly, greedily, finishing more than half the container before she heard the children coming back from their bathroom break. She quickly closed the lunchbox and arranged everything to look untouched. When Rita came back into the classroom and opened her lunchbox, her face fell. "Miss Grace, did you eat my food?" Grace smiled sweetly. "I had to check it for safety, dear. There were some questionable parts that I had to remove." Rita's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't argue. She ate what remained of her lunch, which was barely enough to satisfy a toddler, and then quietly ate the snacks from her backpack. Grace felt satisfied for the first time in days. Her stomach was finally full. She taught the afternoon lessons with renewed energy. But by the time school was ending, Grace began to feel strange. Her heart was beating faster than normal, she felt slightly dizzy and nauseous. She assumed it was just because she had eaten too much too quickly. The next day, Grace felt better. She had forgotten about the strange symptoms. When lunchtime came around, she ate from the children's lunch boxes again, including Rita's. The jollof rice was excellent once more. This became Grace's new pattern. Now that she had overcome her reluctance to take Rita's food, she ate from the girls' lunch box every single day. And every day, she was consuming a dose of Rita's heart medication. 3 weeks after Rita joined the class, Grace began experiencing serious symptoms. Her heart would race unexpectedly, even when she was sitting still. She felt dizzy during lessons and had to grip her desk to steady herself. Her hands trembled when she wrote on the chalkboard. At night, she couldn't sleep because her heartbeat was so irregular it frightened her. But Grace was too proud and too scared to see a doctor. Doctors cost money she didn't have, and besides, what would she tell them? That she had been stealing food from children, and now felt sick? They would judge her, might even report her. So she kept teaching, kept stealing food, and kept getting worse. One morning, as Grace was collecting the lunch boxes, she suddenly felt the room spin around her. She grabbed the edge of her desk, breathing heavily. The children stared at her with worried faces. "Miss Grace, are you okay?" Nia asked. "I'm fine," Grace managed to say, though her voice was weak. "Just a little tired." But she wasn't fine. As she opened Rita's lunchbox, the aroma of food made her stomach turn. For the first time in months, she didn't feel hungry. She felt sick. But habit and addiction drove her forward. She forced herself to eat. Halfway through the meal, Grace felt her heart do something strange. It seemed to skip several beats, then race to catch up. The room tilted violently. She tried to stand, tried to call for help, but her voice came out as a whisper. The last thing Grace saw before she collapsed was Rita's face, watching her with an expression that was neither scared nor surprised. Just sad. Grace fell forward. Her head hitting the desk with a sickening thud before she slumped to the floor. The children screamed. Kofi ran to the door, but it was locked. "Help!" he shouted, pounding on the door with his small fists. "Somebody help! Miss Grace is on the floor." Other teachers heard the commotion and rushed to the classroom. They broke down the door and found Grace unconscious on the floor, the children huddled together in terror, and lunch boxes scattered across the desk with food spilling everywhere. An ambulance was called. Grace was rushed to the hospital. And finally, after months of stolen meals and broken trust, the truth was about to come out. At the hospital, doctors worked frantically to stabilize Grace. Her heart was beating erratically, and her blood pressure was dangerously high. They ran tests immediately, trying to understand what had caused such a sudden collapse in an otherwise healthy young woman. When the blood test results came back, the attending doctor frowned in confusion. "This doesn't make sense," he muttered to the nurse beside him. "She has extremely high levels of cardoxin in her system. That's a medication for severe heart conditions. But according to her medical history, she doesn't have any heart problems. Could she be taking someone else's medication?" The nurse suggested. "Possibly, but why would she do that? And the levels suggest she's been taking it regularly for weeks, maybe longer." Back at the school, Mrs. Okoro had gathered all the parents for an emergency meeting. The classroom had been preserved as it was, with the lunch boxes still on the desk as evidence. Mrs. Williams arrived at the school within minutes of getting the call. When she heard what had happened, her face went pale. "Where is my daughter?" she demanded. "Is Rita okay?" "Rita is fine, Mrs. Williams," Mrs. Okoro assured her. "All the children are safe. They're in the library with the assistant teachers. But we need to talk about what happened." Mrs. Williams looked at the scattered lunch boxes on Grace's desk and her lawyer's mind began putting pieces together. Was Miss Grace eating the children's food? Mrs. Okoro's face showed both shame and anger. "It appears that way, yes. When we broke down the door, we found her collapsed with food from multiple lunch boxes in front of her. Mrs. Williams, I owe you and all the parents a deep apology. This should never have been allowed to happen." Mrs. Adamu stepped forward from the crowd of parents. "I tried to tell you, Ma. Weeks ago, I reported this. I even saw it with my own eyes." Mrs. Okoro closed her eyes briefly, the weight of her failure heavy on her shoulders. "You're right, Mrs. Adamu. I should have investigated more thoroughly. I should have believed you. I let my personal regard for Miss Grace cloud my judgment, and children suffered because of it." Mrs. Williams spoke up, her voice steady and professional. "Mrs. Okoro, I need to tell you something important. My daughter Rita has a serious heart condition. She takes medication daily, and I mix it into her food to ensure she gets the proper dosage. That medication is harmless to Rita, but it can be extremely dangerous to anyone else who ingests it, especially in repeated doses." The room fell silent as the implication sank in. "Are you saying?" Mrs. Okoro began. "I'm saying that if Miss Grace has been eating Rita's lunch regularly, she's been consuming heart medication that her body doesn't need. That could absolutely cause the kind of collapse we just witnessed." Mrs. Okoro sat down heavily in a nearby chair. "Did the school know about Rita's condition?" "I filled out all the medical forms when Rita enrolled, but we hadn't had our follow-up meeting yet to discuss the details. It was on my schedule for next week." Mrs. Williams paused. "I always warn Rita never to share her food with anyone, precisely because of this risk. But I never imagined a teacher would be taking food from the children." Another parent spoke up, anger in her voice. "So, you're telling us this woman has been starving our children? Stealing their lunches and eating it herself?" "It appears so," Mrs. Okoro said quietly. The room erupted in angry voices. Parents who had trusted the school, trusted Grace, now felt betrayed and furious. Their children had been coming home hungry for months, and no one had protected them. Mrs. Okoro raised her hands for silence. "Please, I know you're angry. You have every right to be. But right now, we need to focus on the children and on making sure this never happens again. I'm implementing immediate changes, starting today." "What kind of changes?" Mrs. Adamu asked, her voice sharp. First, we're installing security cameras in every classroom. Second, no teacher will be allowed to lock classroom doors during school hours. Third, we're creating a parent hotline where concerns can be reported directly and anonymously. And fourth, I will personally meet with each of you to hear your children's experiences and determine what support they need to recover from this trauma. What about Miss Grace? Someone called out. What happens to her? That depends on what the doctors find and what the investigation reveals, Mrs. Okoro said. But I can tell you this, regardless of her medical condition, she will never teach at this school, or any school I have influence over again. Her behavior was not just unprofessional, it was criminal. She abused her position of trust and harmed children in her care. Mrs. Williams nodded approvingly. I'll be consulting with my colleagues about potential legal action. What she did constitutes theft, child endangerment, and abuse of authority. The parents need to decide together how we want to proceed. At the hospital, Grace slowly regained consciousness. Her head throbbed, her heart felt weak, and her entire body ached. When she opened her eyes, she saw a doctor standing beside her bed with a very serious expression. Miss Okonkwo, I'm Dr. Mensah. You're at City General Hospital. You collapsed at the school and were brought here by ambulance. Do you remember what happened? Grace's mind was foggy, but slowly the memories came back. The classroom. The lunch boxes. The feeling of the room spinning. I was eating lunch, and then I felt dizzy. Whose lunch were you eating? Dr. Mensah asked pointedly. Grace hesitated. Even now, even here, she wanted to lie, but the doctor's eyes told her he already knew something. The children's, she whispered finally. I was eating the children's lunch. Dr. Mensah nodded. How long has this been going on? 6 months, maybe more. I don't know exactly. And have you been eating from the same children's lunch boxes repeatedly? Grace nodded, shame flooding through her. Miss Okonkwo, we found very high levels of a prescription heart medication in your blood. It's called Cadoxin. Do you have a heart condition? No, I've never had heart problems. Then someone whose food you've been eating does have a heart condition and is taking this medication regularly. When you ate their food, you were also consuming their medicine. Over weeks and months, that medication built up in your system to dangerous levels. Your body doesn't need it, so it's been essentially poisoning you. Grace felt ice run through her veins. Poisoning me? Yes. The symptoms you've been experiencing. The irregular heartbeat, the dizziness, the nausea, all of that is because you've been taking medication your body doesn't need. You're lucky we got to you when we did. If this had continued much longer, you could have experienced permanent kidney damage, or even heart failure. Grace began to cry, not tears of self-pity, but tears of realization. Her greed had literally been killing her. Miss Okonkwo, I need to be very clear with you about something, Dr. Mensah continued, his voice becoming stern. What you did to those children is serious. You stole from them. You made them go hungry. You abused your position of trust. And beyond the moral and legal implications, you put your own health at catastrophic risk. Do you understand that? Yes, Grace whispered through her tears. You're going to need treatment for the next several weeks to flush this medication out of your system and stabilize your heart. During that time, I strongly suggest you also seek psychological help. The kind of behavior you've been engaging in, the compulsive stealing and eating, suggests deeper issues that need to be addressed. Will I be okay? Grace asked, her voice small and frightened. Physically, yes, with proper treatment. But Miss Okonkwo, the real question is, will those children be okay? The damage you've done to them isn't just physical hunger. It's psychological. You betrayed their trust in adults, in teachers, in authority figures. That kind of damage can last a lifetime. Grace closed her eyes as the full weight of what she had done crashed over her like a wave. She had thought she was just satisfying her appetite, just taking a little bit here and there. But she had been stealing from children. Innocent, trusting children, who believed she cared about them. I'm so sorry, she whispered, but she knew those words were meaningless now. In the weeks that followed, Bright Future Academy underwent massive changes. The security cameras were installed in every classroom. The parent hotline was set up and advertised widely. Mrs. Okoro personally met with every family affected by Grace's actions. But more importantly, the school brought in a child psychologist named Dr. Amina to work with the children who had been in Nursery 3 Yellow. Dr. Amina was a warm woman with kind eyes and a gentle voice. She met with the children in small groups, creating a safe space where they could talk about what had happened. Can anyone tell me how you felt when Miss Grace took your food? Dr. Amina asked, during one session. Zara, who had been so shy and quiet for so long, was the first to speak. I felt hungry. And sad. My mama makes good food, and I wanted to eat it, but Miss Grace ate it instead. That must have been very hard, Dr. Amina said gently. Did you try to tell anyone? Zara shook her head. Miss Grace said if we told, she would make everyone hate us. She did it to Rita. Rita tried to keep her food, and Miss Grace made nobody talk to her. Rita spoke up then, her voice clear and strong. But then Miss Grace got sick from my food. My mama said it was because my medicine was in it. My mama said it's not my fault, but sometimes I feel bad that Miss Grace got sick. Dr. Amina leaned forward. Rita, what happened to Miss Grace is not your fault at all. Your mama was giving you medicine you need to be healthy. Miss Grace took something that didn't belong to her, and there were consequences. That's not your responsibility. Do you understand? Rita nodded slowly. I think so. Over several weeks, Dr. Amina worked with each child individually and in groups. She taught them that what happened was not normal and not okay. She helped them understand that adults sometimes make very bad choices, and when that happens, it's not the children's fault. She also taught them something important, how to speak up when something is wrong. If an adult, even a teacher, does something that makes you feel uncomfortable or unsafe, what should you do? Dr. Amina asked. Tell another adult. Kofi said enthusiastically. Exactly. Tell your parents. Tell another teacher, tell the headmistress. Keep telling people until someone listens and helps you. You all did nothing wrong. Miss Grace was the adult, and she was supposed to take care of you, but she didn't. That was her failure, not yours. For Mrs. Adamu and Zara, the healing journey was particularly profound. Zara began to come out of her shell, becoming more confident and assertive. She learned that her voice mattered, that she had the right to speak up for herself. One evening, as Mrs. Adamu was braiding Zara's hair, her daughter said something that made her mother's eyes fill with tears. Mama, Dr. Amina said that what Miss Grace did was wrong. She said teachers should protect us, not take from us. That's absolutely right, my darling. Mama, I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. Mrs. Adamu set down the comb and pulled Zara into a tight hug. You have nothing to be sorry for, my love. You were scared, and that's understandable. But I'm so proud of you for being brave now. You're learning to use your voice, and that's one of the most important things in life. Grace spent 3 weeks in the hospital receiving treatment. Her heart gradually stabilized, and the medication was flushed from her system. But the psychological weight of what she had done only grew heavier with each passing day. The school had fired her immediately. Her teaching license was under review by the Education Board. Several parents were considering pressing criminal charges. And worst of all, Grace had to live with the knowledge of what she had done to innocent children. On her last day in the hospital, she received a visitor she didn't expect, Mrs. Okoro. The headmistress sat in the chair beside Grace's bed, her face stern but not unkind. Miss Grace, I came here to tell you several things. First, you will never work at Bright Future Academy or any school in this district again. I've made sure of that. Grace nodded, tears streaming down her face. Second, some of the parents want to press charges against you. I cannot stop them, and frankly, I wouldn't if I could. You deserve to face the legal consequences of your actions. I know. But third, Mrs. Okoro continued, her voice softening slightly. I want you to understand something. You were once a good teacher. I remember when you first started, how passionate you were, how much you cared. Something went wrong along the way. I don't know if it was financial stress, personal problems, or something else. But Grace, you let your problems turn you into someone who hurt children. That's unforgivable in my eyes. Grace sobbed openly now. I'm so sorry, I don't know what happened to me. It started small, just once because I was hungry. But then it became a habit, an addiction almost. I knew it was wrong, but I couldn't stop myself. That's something you need to work through with a professional, Mrs. Okoro said. But I want you to know that those children are receiving help now. We brought in a psychologist. They're learning that what you did was not their fault, that they deserve to be protected and cared for, that their voices matter. Are they okay? Grace asked, her voice breaking. They will be, eventually. Children are resilient, but Grace, some of those children may carry trust issues for the rest of their lives because of what you did. Little Zara was terrified to speak up because you threatened her. Rita felt responsible for your illness even though she did nothing wrong. These children will need time and support to heal from what you put them through. Grace covered her face with her hands. I wish I could take it all back. I wish I had never started. I wish I had been strong enough to ask for help instead of stealing from children. Wishing doesn't change what happened, Mrs. Okoro said firmly. But Grace, you can still do something meaningful with this experience. When you leave this hospital, get help. Real help. See a therapist. Figure out why you did what you did. And if you're given the opportunity, use your story to warn other teachers, other people in positions of trust, about how easy it is to abuse power when you're struggling. I will, Grace promised. I'll do whatever it takes to make something good come from this disaster. Mrs. Okoro stood to leave. I hope you mean that. Because right now, those are just words. What matters is what you do from this point forward. After Mrs. Okoro left, Grace lay in her hospital bed and thought about everything that had happened. She thought about the first time she took Naya's food, telling herself it was just one spoonful. She thought about how that one spoonful became two, then half a lunchbox, then multiple lunchboxes every day. She thought about Zara's scared face, Rita's defiant courage, and the way all those children had looked at her with trust that she didn't deserve. And she made a decision. When she left this hospital, she would dedicate herself to becoming better, not to redeem herself, that might be impossible, but to ensure that she never hurt anyone like this again. 6 months later, Bright Future Academy held a special assembly for parents and students. Mrs. Okoro stood at the podium with a mix of solemnity and hope in her expression. Today marks an important milestone for our school. She began. 6 months ago, we faced a crisis that shook our community to its core. One of our teachers betrayed the trust we placed in her, and children suffered as a result. As the headmistress, I take full responsibility for not catching this sooner, for not listening carefully enough when concerns were raised. She paused, looking out at the assembled parents and children. But today, I want to talk about what we've learned and how we've grown from this difficult experience. Mrs. Okoro gestured to the screens mounted around the assembly hall. You can see our new security system, with cameras in every classroom. But more important than cameras is the culture we're building. We've created multiple channels for students and parents to report concerns. We've trained our teachers on recognizing signs of abuse of authority. And most importantly, we're teaching our children that their voices matter. She smiled at the children, sitting in the front rows. We're teaching them that if something doesn't feel right, they should speak up. That adults are supposed to protect them, not harm them. And that when one adult fails them, there are other adults who will listen and help. Mrs. Adamu was sitting in the audience with Zara beside her. She watched as her daughter sat up straighter, more confident than she had ever been before. The shy, scared little girl had transformed into someone who knew her own worth. Rita sat with her mother, Mrs. Williams. The girl who had always been brave had become even stronger, using her voice not just to protect herself, but to stand up for others. I also want to recognize two people specifically, Mrs. Okoro continued. Mrs. Adamu, who had the courage to report what she saw even when she wasn't believed at first. And young Rita, whose bravery in protecting her lunch gave other children the courage to question what was happening to them. Thank you both. The assembly hall erupted in applause. Zara squeezed her mother's hand, and Mrs. Adamu felt tears of pride in her eyes. Finally, Mrs. Okoro said, I want to share that our school is partnering with Dr. Amina to create a new program called Voices Matter. This program will teach children of all ages about their rights, about recognizing inappropriate behavior from adults, and about how to speak up safely when something is wrong. We are also offering this program to other schools in the district free of charge, because what happened here should never happen anywhere. More applause filled the hall. After the assembly, Mrs. Adamu and Mrs. Williams found themselves talking in the school courtyard while their daughters played nearby. Your daughter is remarkable, Mrs. Adamu said. Rita's courage inspired my Zara to find her own voice. Mrs. Williams smiled warmly. And your persistence in reporting Grace saved all our children. When the headmistress didn't believe you at first, you didn't give up. That took incredible strength. I just did what any mother would do, Mrs. Adamu said modestly. No, Mrs. Williams said firmly. Many mothers would have doubted themselves when an authority figure dismissed their concerns. Many would have worried about making trouble or being seen as difficult. You trusted your instincts and fought for your child. That's not common. It's exceptional. The two women watched as Zara and Rita played together, laughing and chasing each other around the courtyard. Two children who had been victims of the same abuse, now friends supporting each other through healing. Do you know what happened to Grace? Mrs. Williams asked. Mrs. Adamu nodded. I heard she moved to another city. She's working as a clerk in a shop, not teaching. I also heard she's seeing a therapist regularly. I don't know if she'll ever truly understand the damage she caused, but at least she's not in a position to hurt more children. Some of the parents wanted to press criminal charges, Mrs. Williams said. I was one of them initially. But in the end, we decided that the loss of her career and her teaching license was punishment enough. We wanted to focus our energy on healing our children rather than on revenge. That was wise, Mrs. Adamu agreed. Though I wonder sometimes if she realizes how close she came to causing permanent harm. Not just to the children's trust, but to her own health. If she had continued eating Rita's medicated food much longer. The doctors said she could have died or had permanent organ damage, Mrs. Williams finished quietly. It's a strange kind of justice, isn't it? Her greed literally poisoned her. 2 years later, Grace sat in a small community center, facing a group of young teachers in training. She looked different now, older somehow, with lines of experience and regret etched into her face. But her eyes held something they hadn't held before, genuine remorse and hard-won wisdom. Thank you for letting me speak to you today, she began. Her voice steady but humble. My name is Grace, and I'm here to tell you about the worst thing I've ever done, so that none of you ever make the same mistake. The young teachers leaned forward, curious and attentive. 2 years ago, I was a teacher at a prestigious school. I was admired by parents, liked by staff, and trusted completely by my students. I had a good job, a good reputation, and a bright future ahead of me. And I threw it all away because of greed. She told them the whole story, leaving nothing out. She told them about the first time she took a child's food, about how it became a habit, then an addiction. She told them about locking the classroom door and eating while the children watched. She told them about threatening children who wanted to speak up, about lying to parents and administrators, about the elaborate web of deception she had built. I told myself I wasn't really hurting anyone, Grace said. I told myself the children wouldn't remember, that they had plenty to eat at home, that I deserved a little extra because I worked so hard. But I was lying to myself. I was hurting those children deeply, every single day. She paused. Emotion thick in her voice. One of my students had a medical condition. Her mother mixed her medication into her food. I didn't know this because I never asked, never paid attention to anything except my own hunger. For weeks, I ate that child's food, and with every bite, I was consuming medication that my body didn't need. It built up in my system until my heart nearly gave out. I collapsed in front of my class. I traumatized those children further by making them watch me fall unconscious. The young teachers looked shocked and horrified. I spent weeks in the hospital. I lost my job, my teaching license, my reputation, everything. But worse than all of that, I have to live knowing that I hurt children who trusted me. Children who believed I cared about them. I betrayed that trust in the worst possible way. Grace looked each person in the room in the eye. I'm telling you this because I want you to understand something crucial. When you become a teacher, you hold immense power over vulnerable people. Children trust you absolutely. Parents trust you with their most precious treasures. That trust is sacred, and if you betray it, you don't just hurt others, you destroy yourself. One of the young teachers raised her hand. How did you let it get so bad? Didn't you realize what you were doing was wrong? Of course I knew it was wrong, Grace said honestly. From the very first time, I knew. But I convinced myself it was a small thing, just once, just a little bit. That's how terrible behavior always starts, with small compromises that seem harmless. Then those small compromises become habits. The habits become patterns. Another teacher asked, "What would you have done differently?" Grace thought carefully before answering. I would have asked for help. I was struggling financially. I was stressed and overwhelmed. Instead of stealing from children, I should have talked to the headmistress, asked for an advance on my salary, reached out to friends or family. There were so many better options available to me, but I was too proud and too ashamed to ask for help. So I took the coward's way out and preyed on children instead. She stood up and walked to the front of the room. Listen to me carefully, all of you. Teaching is one of the most important professions in the world. You shape young minds. You influence how children see themselves and the world. You can build them up or tear them down. You can protect them or harm them. The choice is yours every single day. Grace's voice became stronger, more urgent. When you're struggling, when you're tempted to take shortcuts or abuse your position, remember this: those children are watching you. They believe in you. They trust you. Don't betray that trust. Don't become what I became. The training session ended with the young teachers sitting in thoughtful silence. Several approached Grace afterward to thank her for her honesty. One young woman, tears in her eyes, told Grace that she had been struggling financially and had been tempted to take small things from her classroom. Hearing Grace's story had shown her what path that could lead down. "Thank you for being brave enough to share this," the young woman said. "You've probably saved me from making terrible mistakes." Grace hugged her. "Then something good has come from my horrible choices. That's all I can hope for now, that my story prevents others from going down the same path."